begin 77, I shifted Washington instead of having him down here. I moved him up here. It's really a mixed thing because there's a lot of troops over here in Boston, and the Northeast is the New England area is definitely the nicest place to build up the Continentals, but I just don't see that little area being able to withstand what's going to be sent against it. And I don't think I can launch an attack or a revolution out of South Carolina. But I do think that this area gives me some striking potential at Philadelphia. And wherever I have striking potential, I want to withdraw. I don't feel like I'm going to have a very easy time challenging whatever the Brits send down here. In fact, I may be giving up my Portsmouth fort and destroying all the artillery and everything just so that advantage doesn't, accrue to the Brits, because they can handle the artillery probably better than I can. No, I forgot the Tory militia. I gotta recalculate them, but largely, yeah. To me, it looks like the Americans are about ready to lose. There just isn't much left. This had better be the low point for the Continental Army if they have any chance. But there's hope in the horizon because the French are considering intervening at this point. And God knows why. It looks like the war's over now, but we'll see. Let's take a look at the enormity of the task that the British have in front of them. I've taken their move. We're trying to translate down to the south. They need 20 of the cities. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. All but 2 of the strategic towns. Southern strategy isn't going to win you this game, right? You need to win everywhere. And I think that's appropriate. I also think it probably looks just about impossible no matter what, but that's beside the point. I don't mind a game being unbalanced. I think it actually accurately reflects things. Now, my online buddy Judd, who is a lover of Washington's war, levels criticism, I believe, against this game along the lines that, it shouldn't be about area control. That's not that important to the British. It's not. You can't control the areas without wiping out the military. It's about the military being knocked out and then enforcing a proper level of policing throughout the colonial territories. In order to do this, you have to spread out your British forces so far that there is no way that you can grab 20 cities unless you destroy the Continental's capability to fight. This has to be done piecemeal. You have to win in an area and occupy that area completely, and then you pretty much quell the revolt in that area. There's still the possibility to infiltrate from other areas. Troops can operate in the backwaters because some militia will still be being supported if they're still on the map. But you're not going to start generating new units. Nothing of any significance. You might have a few raiders out in the backwoods, but that's about it. So I think the pacification strategy that's represented in this game is actually pretty damn good. In terms of, you have to clear out the military threat completely and then prevent more from spawning forward. As a coin type simulation, I think it's doing a really great job on that aspect. There are other aspects of this game that I think it does a less stellar job on. The military simulation, for example. But this does a much better job of showing what's going on in you know, in sort of the coin pacification aspect than I think Washington's war does, with its, I don't know, you know, if there's any empty space on your go board, you can like you can survive, you know, in a pocket. But if somehow you're strangled, no matter how big you are, you have it just doesn't make sense to me. But this this seems to represent it in a very nice little way, and I think it does a very good job of really kind of nailing home what's going on in terms of that. Now, it does come to the fundamental point that you have to destroy the army, because if the army exists, it will continue to raise forces. It will continue to be able to maintain an insurrection. Balance-wise, man, I just don't see how the Brits can win. I mean, we're doing pretty well right now, but the French are coming in, and unless I can like seal down the New England area, and it doesn't become a backwater, right? Because the French can land troops and can make an invasion and can take one of those strategic cities away and spark a new revolt in the area. So that foreign intervention, I think, forces it. Is the 1780 endpoint reasonable? Yeah, because after that point, the war stops really being... the war really kind of stops being the same sort of endeavor. The Brits know they can't win anymore, and it's really just trying to come up with an honorable peace. It's sort of like the withdrawal from Vietnam. You know, how can we get out of here without completely losing more than just what we've already lost? Yeah, this probably all belongs more in the review, but who knows if I'll remember it then. Right now, the thought's striking me, and I really have a great deal of respect for this as a coin-style game. Movements are continuing with Howe moving back up to Virginia, since I don't need the 10 cities thing anymore for a while. I do need 20 cities, but I'm not really that close to it right now. What was there here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 there. You know, if I settle pretty quickly. I feel like we have to win here before we concern ourselves down there. And really, that's the whole thing. If we can kind of seal down New England and the South Central, then we're prepared to go into the Deep South. But, well, we'll see. And really, the colonials, Washington gathering forces up, not sure what the hell to do with them. Probably going to have to go run and hide somewhere. Same thing here, Lee gathering his forces, trying to see, is there anywhere I can go safely? Resulted in just a wee bit more incremental movement, with Arnold moving up, threatening Ticonderoga. More forces showed up there, though, so that becomes kind of iffy. Over here in Portsmouth, this is dangerous. Shit, not as dangerous as that. Gray, and we'll fix it, is within range where he could, it's kind of hard to tell after the earthquake, where he could reach Portsmouth. Likewise, the British here, again, hard to tell because I hit the one map that had the interesting stuff on it. He's sitting right at the border, so he doesn't affect the command structure over here. I had to move Howe up to the main force, and I got Rawdon moving troops into play. We're trying to put the squeeze on Washington. Washington's the hardest person to squeeze, but he doesn't have a lot of troops. He may have to run south. Got some units moving in this direction from there. And we'll fix the board. French are essentially at war. It's just a question of how quickly their troops start showing up. I do not have enough troops to take on Portsmouth, so Gray has centered himself in Boston, spreading out, getting as close a control as he can. I don't think I can take that, and that means I probably can't actually get control of New England, because I can't march up here unless Arnold gets himself killed pretty easily. Prevost and Howe made his march, and actually whoever was following up behind him, I don't remember who, Rawdon. But Prevost did not make his forced march. Leadership doesn't count for this, except in terms of you can get a bonus. So we got that kind of coordinated attack, which failed. And the Brits may not want to attack. And then the question comes, does Washington want to come out of the entrenchments and attack? And we'll see what happens with the fight, because I kind of wanted the big number odds as opposed to hitting them piecemeal. Washington came out successfully, beat up Howe's stack, destroyed it, and now Howe's in command of the other stack. It's looking pretty hopeless for the Brits. You know, it's just that 20 strategic cities, man. I don't know how you shut them down enough. Anyway, Brits are kind of the opinion that they have to win fast, and to do that they had to rush Washington out of the way. Now, with Howe losing an army, Prevost launched another attack. This was pretty much a one-to-one attack, slight penalties against the Brits. Both sides had one supply. They fought it out, using up the supply. Washington came out of the trenches and counterattacked. Prevost is dead now, and his force not eliminated. They managed a withdrawal in decent order, but they're still in the same location, which potentially means that Washington could come out and smack him around some more. He's got a slight advantage just in numbers. The bigger advantage is he's got militia, which means he's taking losses that don't count for anything, basically, for him. And the Brits are losing regulars there, which is a painful combination. Washington comes out again, just one more round of battle. By the way, these guys are creeping forward slowly. No leadership down there, so I can't do a damn thing, movement-wise. Arnold failed in his forced march to try to get to Albany. Basically, he could have attacked Ticonderoga. Essentially a 2-to-1, because he has supply and they don't. The magazine is long gone. And, you know, he's ravaging the backwoods in New York, and there's not a lot that the Brits can do. They have the opportunity, maybe, to seal down New England, which is pretty important, before the end of the period, the quarter. And at that point, then, well, it becomes kind of what's Arnold's choices. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He's not going to make it back to Norwich, but he could 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 make it as far as Springfield. So I've got to worry about that. I can't hold Boston, and you know the Western Massachusetts. It's just really tough. I don't have the troops to hold everything. If I could close either of the places, that would be kind of cool. I'd love to have them both shut down, but I don't think I can afford that. So then the question becomes, well, maybe I can hit Arnold and disperse back to camps afterwards. Dispatch any of the units from Massachusetts. They had to spread up to cover New England. But I did manage to bring a boat up with some supplies, which was the big thing, hit Arnold, and get a couple rounds of combat against him. The lucky part about all that is I managed to knock out his supplies. So he's a little weaker now, but it should be pretty easy for him to choose either to take Stanwix or Ticonderoga. They're both very weakly defended. Stanwix without Tarleton is probably the better choice. Even though I don't have supplies, I can go take it. And I don't know whether or not I want to keep the fortress. And then also, Springfield's within range of Portsmouth with a forced march. So I do believe, I don't know if I rolled for the French this turn. Good, they failed. I rolled last turn, but the last 2 turns, but this turn I think they're on a 1 or 2. So I think I can actually knock British control out of both of these, which will grow the Continental Army again. We roll into the interphase. Washington fought Fraser to a kind of inconclusive battle near Lancaster, but cost the Brits more regulars. At no real cost to himself. He's still got militia left that we're absorbing. Arnold marched up, grabbed Fort Stanwix. Pretty much an assured thing. This was an overrun, required a forced march, though, to get there. And so the Brits control nothing this time. And here come the French in July. Rochambeau showing up. I can bring them in either here, south, or over into the West Indies. If I bring them in on the West Indies, the Brits have to dispatch an equal force. However, what I saw is I've got a big enough force that combined with Greene, I could probably take New York. And New York's important to the Brits in a lot of ways. More than that, I actually have enough movement points. I can not only drop off troops in New York for the attack, but then I can go beat up on the English Navy. And the English Navy is weaker than the French Navy. The French Navy, the ships are worth 3 each. The British Navy, the ships are worth 2 each in combat. Since it's a differential combat system, that's probably pretty important. So I might be able to drive the British naval power out of the game. And with the application of a fairly large force now kicking around in Massachusetts, the French army, Washington up here, a decent sized force under Arnold, which actually he can't move, but I had no option on that. It's the only place I could build him. We're going to throw a lot of threat into that Hudson Valley area and make the entire Northeast really, really dangerous for the Brits. So that's how I'm seeing things, but the Brits get to move first, and they've got to decide what the hell they want to do. Because life gets scary with this thing here. You know, it's not like I can only hit New York. I could hit Philadelphia. I probably could get as far as Boston if I count it. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, easily. And so pretty much everything along the seacoast is in danger. What do you want to do, bud? You know? My initial reaction is surrender, because I don't think the Brits could hold out against just the colonials the way things have been going. You know, I have stronger forces still on the board, but I just can't figure out how to nail things down. Now, with the Southern strategy, what happens? Well, it's easier to shut these down is, I think, the key to it all. I think trying to operate down here, it's just, there's too much ability for the Continental Army to scamper back and forth and really disrupt things. I think what you've got to do, and this is what somebody was saying, was you got to do the Southern strategy. I think what you've got to do is close down one of these, close down the other one, and, you know, once you close them down, there's nothing there. You know, you just have to defend one border, basically, and it's a long border, and then a shorter one here, but it's not like the mountains are particularly a pleasant place to try to ramble through. The colonials, the Tories and such not, can come forward. You leave some garrison troops behind, and you're probably in fair shape towards defending these things. And you've got a big enough army, you can just sort of push your way north. I still don't know if you can win. I still think, see, the problem is the colonials can let you have the South, right? Because they're going to build up a huge army if you let them have the Northeast. And that's what worries me, and why I tried a more historical approach. Because I didn't see that one as being viable either. And the Brits start their flight, pulling away from Washington to get to Philadelphia. Hall, I'm not sure which. I'm not great at writing my own names on counters. Makes it across the river from New York. He could have ferried across, but he didn't make his forced march. Over here we've got Carleton fleeing Boston over to Hartford. The troops in Hartford, what little there were, marched this way. The biggie is Arnold was wounded in the siege of Stanwix, but the Brits were unable to continue the siege. Their strength fell below 1-to-1, and they called it off. The wound actually happens after the battle, so you don't even find out that, oh, well, that would have maybe changed things. The Brits have supply, the Americans don't, which kind of makes it an even fight. But now come the French. Numbers wouldn't indicate it, and by the way, the French fleet had no effect on the Brits. But it was a pretty close fight with a couple of plus bonuses to the French. But they took the British out pretty easily, actually. Just knocked them out of off the board. Washington overran Wyoming, was running over to help relieve Stanwix, but the Brits get to attack during the American turn, so they actually expended their supply and got lucky. And that's kind of sort of an important factor, I guess. But now we got a big combined French and American army with supplies. We managed to capture British supply. Must have done it in one round, I guess. Yeah. Before, how could that have happened? Yeah, we got a good roll on a good mix on the tactical results table. Managed to capture one of the British supplies, which replaces nothing really. I don't think the French lost a supply. So it was pretty easy to take New York, and now there's this big army in the way, and it's enough, you know, to really threaten this. It's got to, the Brits are not going to be good at scampering out of the way. Now, granted, the French army doesn't move any better than the British army does, but it doesn't move any worse either. What we've been seeing is the Americans, with an increased mobility, able to sometimes stay out of the way of the Brits. Well, that's not going to be as easy when you're looking at two continental powers struggling. And you know, the American troops can always push forward and take care of things on their own. It's not like there's a lot of defense up here. This has all been stripped bare for the Stanwix operation. And it's really kind of all right, where now? You know, what do you do? There's very little hope that I see for the Brits here under these circumstances. I just don't see many answers, but the Brits slip away to New London, getting on their boats. I'm still in Philadelphia, which is dangerous with all those cannons around, but those cannons aren't going to be able to get to me very easily. Van Houston or whatever is marching down to try to scare Washington away. And I just don't have a strategic grasp of anything I can do. You know, I mean, I could make a march down and try to hit here, but there's militia there, and I'm not gonna be able to reach actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe with a forced march, hitting Washington. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, I could get myself into range of Washington, but he's going to be able to run quicker. And I kind of feel like I'm in a better position here. Basically, what I feel like has to happen is that the French and Continentals have to engage me in a big battle, and I have to win that battle in a big way. I think I want to decamp here from Hartford, though. That doesn't look like a safe place. That's in range of maybe not the cannons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't think I can force march them. So I hope I can't. See, I don't like giving this up, and this is my biggest force. Jeez. The forces that I have coming down aren't that big. Let me see if those cannons can force march, because if they can't force march, I feel pretty safe there, as safe as I do against anything, really. French load up their guns on the boat. The rest of their troops are able to march over, meet up with Washington. Philadelphia falls. Boom. You know, I mean, it's and if I fled, well, what would happen? I don't know. You know, it's possible we could have had a combination hitting the big force there instead. It's just, the English are just so battered at this point. The Brits pull back to Boston. They set up the perimeter, but, you know, they're not going to hold New England. Somebody's going to screw it, even if it's just this guy charging somewhere. Yeah, not all of them, but some of them. They attacked Arnold over here to no good effect. He withdrew from combat. And now we're ready to go into an interphase, but first the Americans get to go. And that's the problem, is they constantly get that, oh, I can bone the British position again. Indeed, Lafayette was able to take Springfield. Washington's now in New York. It just looks like a lost cause, but maybe one final battle, a Cornwallis type situation. Unfortunately for me, I've still got leaders like Howe. I got Burgoyne there too, but Cornwallis outranks him at least. Yeah, I'd kind of like to run Howe back up into the New York or something. One of the problems is I want to get my forces, you know, consolidated so that I can maybe force a singular battle that makes things clear. I'm not sure that there's any real need for it, though. You know, the Cornwallis surrender is sort of the marking point, and, well, you know, that's why we end in 80, right? But I don't think there's anything of that nature that has to end this, because this game doesn't require that the Americans actually do anything by 80, like wipe out the majority of the British force. All they really have to do is exist, more or less, and there's just no way from this standpoint that I can see the Brits regaining the kind of dominance they had before the French showed up. And that dominance was waning anyway, just because of the structural advantages that the game gives to the Americans in terms of grabbing, you know, a city, running out, grabbing a city, and then, hey, the Brits don't control it anymore, you know. Anything that's weakly held is going to fall, and there's no way to strongly hold everything. You know, if you put medium-sized forces everywhere, a big stack of Americans will sweep through and wipe them out. If you leave weak forces, it doesn't take much to knock them out, as shown with Lafayette coming here for the Department of Corrections to step in. This has probably been at least semi-intentional, but a viewer posted, a longtime player of this, a mistake he noticed where I force march supply units, and I think I've been doing that all game. I also believe, I'm pretty sure, I know I have been. I'm also fairly certain that I did it partially intentionally. It has to do with the movement rate of the supply units. Now, by the rules themselves, you're not supposed to do this, but one of there are a couple of reasons for it. One is that an army simply didn't move in forced march without its supplies, you know. But to what extent that means, and to what extent the supplies mean something, is different in this. And since they seem to be primarily combat-oriented supplies, I could see where an army might make that kind of, you know, quick stab out to handle a small enemy or whatever, without dragging all their ammunition with them, and, you know, followers that service the weaponry, etc. The main reason that I've been doing it has to do with the fact that they have the same movement allowance as the regular units. I assume that these are fairly mobile supply organizations rather than a long army train. That probably, well, we'll leave that alone. It may or may not be a reasonable assumption, but because they had the same movement allowance, I did it that way. The artillery, I don't force march because it's got a slower movement. It's obvious that normal movement isn't applicable for them. But the rules are pretty clear. Only the combat units can force march. Now, I think I've been making a mistake in doing so. The reason for that is we've been seeing a lot of charges of large armies to engage fairly hefty positions. And this is by both sides, really. And I think we've been seeing too many major battles. And a big part of that has to do with once you're defeated in this game, you probably have used up your supply. You can run away kind of safely. Whereas if you lose some combat rounds, or if you really want to, you can just destroy them and run. And these are valid options that wouldn't happen under the way I've been playing it. And I think it would affect the number of mass battles we've had. So, if anything, I think the game actually achieves a little bit more realism in terms of the military operations, which is probably actually where I've been feeling the most, this isn't quite working. Well, maybe my fault. Following what the Brits' plan is, they want to try to create that grand battle. Well, they marched forward, hit Lafayette, almost totally destroyed his force, and maybe even more importantly, they did so without spending a supply unit. They have a pile of supply in place. I've trimmed away the fat of Howe and Burgoyne, I think, to make sure they don't end up in command of that force. Now, the leader rules are kind of funky because you can jiggle the leaders at the end of any phase, during the midst between interfaces, and even if you fail and get a penalized leader because of the interface, you can always strip him off and throw him into the pile of ineffectives, right? Because it's only the one leader. Well, two leaders get affected. One is the commander-in-chief. Well, if that's Howe, who cares? He's as bad as it gets. And in this case, well, if Cornwallis, for example, were limited, is it that terrible? No, I've got Leslie to back him up, and I've got plenty of capability to keep moving forces. So it's not that terrible a thing if you end up screwing your command situation up, unless you're down at the bottom. Now, regarding the supply issue, the sort of related factor is that you can move those cannons and supply wagons and stuff around by boat, which makes the coastal areas particularly dangerous for the rebels, at least early in the game. And now it's kind of, the Brits are kind of afraid of the possibility of French mobility. See, but here's the thing, the French supply wagons can't make it beyond here with the roll as it actually is. I don't know if I can reverse how I've been playing it at this point. On the other hand, I could sail from port to New Haven and march right in. I believe I'd have half my movement allowance. I can't get my cannons there, though. So my cannons become kind of this, they become this albatross on you, where if you do have to take a fort out, you've got to figure out how to get them in place. But I got a whole bunch here that can slowly limp their way into range. Other thing, I forgot to make my rolls for variable reinforcements coming in the interface, because both the French, who actually get additional troops, and the Brits, who just get additional boats, have a possibility to bring stuff into play that way. So the Americans have a problem, or the allied French-American army. I have lost D'Estaing, and Rochambeau's on the wounded chart. I actually don't have enough leaders to make the attack that the Brits want me to make. I would have made it. I outnumbered them about 3-2. Could have shipped the wagons into range, not the artillery. It was going to be a complicated logistical factor because I wasn't sure what to do with my cannons. But instead I sent the boats over to fail to find the British boats, and I'm just shifting everything north to face the Brits here. And, you know, to give them that battle if they want it. But at this point, I'm largely just trying to hide in my locations until I get leaders back. Which doesn't really mean that the Brits are going to be able to control New England, because I have to protect Boston. I have to protect up here from a strike here. I got to protect the Hartford, Springfield against strikes coming from New York. I'm not going to be able to control it, but I'm going to be able to probably set it up so that I can have well, this is actually probably safe if I get up here, for the simple reason that these guys aren't going to be able to reach there. Well, I'm allowing that forced march with supply still, I think, so yeah, they would. But yeah, the game has become probably too mobile for forces that are really capable of striking. Like, I'd have to send too big a strike force up here, perhaps. It's hard to tell, because it's not like I have the supply to waste to put it in all those outposts. So a slightly larger force can probably take it, you know, and that might be worthwhile. But yeah, it's a situation where it's really tough on the Brits in terms of I don't see their possibility of getting a control anywhere. And then the value of trying to retreat to the south seems much, much lower right now in some ways. It's too late, basically. The British plan, they bring Fraser over. That gives them a position where they have some strength. They might be able to make a serious threat of controlling New England. It does get rid of a potential advantage. By being split up, they would force the Americans and the French to kind of choose one direction or another to go in, which could be problematic. Here, well, we can let the Tories up in the Adirondacks continue. They're not doing too much damage up there. In fact, since there are British regulars there, they're actually well, they're reducing the Continental Army. They're increasing the effect of the militia, though, for the rebellion. But Washington marched the entire force, including a forced march of French supply units into here. I couldn't bring my entire army, but I don't need it against Fraser. And if I can knock out a big part of the British army, it might be worth me letting Howe have a strike at me. Meanwhile, Arnold is making it into Philadelphia. We're slowly shifting troops. I did the thing the British should have done right from the beginning, which is build a bridge to New York out of a couple of bateaux. You know, if you have supply, you might as well do it. It couldn't be used this turn, but that's okay. And just funneling the troops north. Washington was successful in knocking Fraser out. I'm beginning to think Howe is going to go wander away. I'm going to take the penalty, and I'm just going to go for the one shot, see if I can win the game, you know, get back in the game, basically. But Washington's so resilient to a successful attack that I don't think I have much chance, actually. So, jeez. I mean, is there some place I can go and start over, basically? Maybe I could take New York, you know? Get the extra troops that way. And just get out of the Boston situation. I've got a lot of shipping capacity with the Brits, so that may be my best move. There isn't a hell of a lot left here, although they do have a couple artillery. They don't have any supply. Well, the boats can't quite make it to New York, at least not the big ones, and I need the big ones. And I actually need the military ships and the transports to be stacked together to give me any defense against the French. They could just wipe out my transports otherwise. So instead we pulled out of Newport, and we're gathering everything up in Boston. We're planning a move somewhere. I don't know where, but this looks pretty hopeless. And it's the Yorktown situation. I pulled out of Portsmouth, I pulled Washington forward. I've got the French Navy trying to drive the British Navy out of the water. We'll see what the results of all of it are. This is probably the British surrender. I forgot about the Continental Navy. Each turn, starting back in 77, we're already in 78, I had to make a check to see if it disappeared. I forgot all about that. I made a roll and it failed on the first roll that I made. So, it didn't have much effect. It really can't. There's just a small period, I think, before the French Navy comes in where the British transports could operate freely if the Continental Navy isn't destroyed. And the important thing, and it's hard to tell from the map, so I allowed the artillery to make it back to Boston again. But with all the artillery the Americans have, they knocked the British fleet out for 2 quarters. With all the artillery they have, there's no way the Brits can sit in the entrenchments. They need to be a mobile force, so they're going to come out and fight. The Brits just got a half defender eliminated. The battle finally swung into the 3-2 range. Big bonus for the Americans when they got a good chit pick or card pick or whatever. I think this is the point where Howe surrenders. There's just no chance. He's down to 10 strength points of regular British in his main force. He's facing 30 strength points of Americans. It's time to surrender his sword. And rather than fighting the battle out, I think that's exactly what he'll do, is the Yorktown situation. And his surrender there doesn't mean the war's over any more than Cornwallis's surrender did, but it's effectively over. Now it's a matter of, trying to win that peace with honor. So, what about the effects of various things? Let me come back for the wrap because my battery's running low. I guess the first thing is, let's take a look at the rules change that I semi-consciously made about making the supply wagons able to force march. I think that created an incorrect flavor to the combats. It made pitched battles a little too easy for both sides. It probably favored the Brits more than the Americans, simply because in general the Brits do want to try to eliminate the large forces more than the Americans really feel the need. The Americans kind of want to get the British to overextend themselves and fall into a trap. But I think maybe with the Brits having those pitched battle opportunities, they're more capable of falling into a trap, and that may have had some effect. The Northeast, man, this is impossible to hold. It really is. There's just too many places where a strategic city or town is off kind of in a place where the Brits can't assert enough force. Now, if they could assert force, here in central, throughout the center of New England, and another force up here, it's more plausible, but still the Americans are going to have to fling their way, or are going to be able to fling their way out. We saw turns where it looked like the Brits were going to give both the middle states in New England mainly because of the Washington leader counter not being on the board for a while, and the Brits got they got to smack green around at one point, and that was kind of nice. It really did look like they had a shot for a while. But I think I have to concur with the feeling that it's the South where you want to start. You want to just load up your Brits, send them south. At the very least, this looked impossible. You know, I got some very good results, but they still weren't good enough. There was always places for the Americans to hide back here in terms of a strategic city in a bad location. So what if I start down here? Well, sweeping South Carolina should be pretty easy. There's not a whole hell of a lot here, and the cities are all fairly accessible to one another, especially with naval power on the rivers. Moving up to North Carolina, it's not that different. There's a lot of distance here, but it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it's 2 turns away to get to there. But here's the point. Once you seal all these cities and have them all garrisoned and clean up whatever's kicking around, you're done down there, right? It's going to be very hard for the Continentals to wage a backwoods campaign coming down there. They're going to have to do it out of here, and that's where you're directing your attention next. And then again here, we've got a lot of these cities are fairly close together, Charlottesville and then Alexandria. Again, you can kind of sweep that area and do a pacification. It's almost like the south part of Vietnam, where you can really get control over that more civilized, cultivated area. But now when you get into the mountain area, here's where it gets ugly, right? How do you make that move up into the New York area? And I think people are claiming that this is pretty much at least some people, that this is pretty much a automatic win strategy for the Brits. The problem I have with it is, depending on how long you can delay that southern strategy from getting them to, say, Philadelphia or whatever, there's going to be a pretty big Continental Army and a lot of supplies and such not focused in their central area. And they may well be able to just meet your army and beat it. And then they're still going to have the same trouble that they had in the game that I was playing in terms of pacifying this region. This is just, you know, trying to extrapolate the position. So I'm not so certain it's an absolute victory. And at the same time, they've got a lot of troops spread out down here holding those cities, about 10 units or so. The nice thing about it is it gives you your 10 cities by 77 probably easier or more easily, well, by the end of 77, than trying to pacify these regions and grab the cities. So you're less likely to lose the game automatically at that point. It may get interesting once the French come in with a heavy, heavy Continental Army in place. It may be pretty hard to shut that all down. I don't know, not having tried it yet. What about the effect of the leaders so far? And I'll get some of this in the review, obviously. The biggest thing it had an effect on is to make the war down here, or whatever backwater areas of the war there are, much, much less interesting. I would almost suggest, my feeling is there was one leader that had a major effect on the game, and that's Washington. Washington's special ability to withdraw from combat really changes the tenor of the whole game. And rather than add all these counters, maybe just add a Washington counter who has that ability to withdraw his army after 2 rounds of combat. And, you know, have him the only leader that you actually worry about. Alternatively, of course, there is the third edition fan-based rules, or what fan-made rules, or whatever, that start to get into a lot of other things. You start adding a lot of additional counters, elites. You start worrying about taking militia and using them as partisans, and I have no idea what that rule is like, but it adds a whole bunch more leaders, and I assume increases the hit and run aspect of the game for the Americans, which may be a way to balance out the Southern strategy. Now, I believe there are also British partisans, aren't there? Yeah, Brant counts as a partisan. Not sure who Watson is, whether he's American or Crown. But yeah, it might be interesting to try to look at that as a more detailed examination of the game. It might be the balancing factor if that Southern strategy is indeed a dominating one. So I'm kind of curious about playing the game right with the supplies the way they should be, and trying that Southern strategy, but adding just the Washington counter, and see if that's enough. Because one of the problems with the Washington counter, with the Washington leader, is that he may make the Americans a little too bold, a little too willing to launch into a major battle. On the other hand, it's hard to explain the escape from Long Island and stuff like that unless Washington has some magical abilities like that counter kind of grants him. I'm a little less tempted to play the full third edition rules because, honestly, that doesn't seem to be what this game is about. This game feels to me to be a simpler game focusing more on the political pacification side of things. And I think it really gets that very nicely. And contrary to what Judd says, what I'm seeing of it looks good in terms of the outcomes that I got were not that ahistorical. The only place where I saw any ahistorical activity was really I was getting too many pitched battles. And I think that's the supply, my using the supply rule wrong at fault there. Now, if the problem that I see is that if the best strategy is to move to the southern area, and I see this as hopeless, well then it's not representing it's not giving you, I don't want a game to force you to take the historical decisions, but I want the historical decisions to not be unreasonable ones. And I have the fear that adding a bunch of partisans and such not to try to defeat this, unless they have a territorial limitation on them, which they may, is going to only make the Americans stronger here. So there had better be some sort of counterbalancing mechanism in there. And I would rather explore the main game, the original game, a little bit more before I decide, yeah, that's where I want to go. And to tell you the truth, I would also rather explore games that are designed for that more complex level of detail, especially military detail, than one that was kind of patched together from this. Although there is something really nice about the way the troops are generated and the pacification takes place. Pacification feels a little too successful, though. That is probably my worry, and that may be why the partisans exist. Unfortunately, my own view is there's no possible way for the Brits to actually win, not just the game, but to win the American Revolution. I take Franklin's view on this, which is, once that spark got started, and once you get past like 76, it's over. You know, too many people are too committed, and the population is too divided for it to be really ruled by a foreign power any longer. It's the same kind of situation that faces so many counterinsurgencies. The only way is to essentially start painting the rebellion as the bad guys. And that's one reason that I like that the game ends in 80, because essentially the best you can kind of do is say that, yeah, the Brits did better, you know, and it may be another 20 years before the revolution succeeds, but it's gonna succeed eventually. You know, there's gonna be a war with France and Britain, this, that, and the other. Anyway, I'm probably going way too much into review territory on this wrap. That happens. Maybe I'll repeat some of those ideas for people who don't watch the wraps. Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe I'll just point them to it. All right, let's send this up.